thank you for coming to our wreath making class tonight. I am Jensen. I'm the extension educator here in Bonner County. My office is over in the Sandpoint area, and I focus on horticulture, gardening, as well as some small farm, mostly crop production. I'm not an animal person, but when it comes to growing plants, any kind of plants, I love it. And I love to be able to use the plants like we'll do today for our wreath making. This is one of my favorite classes to teach. So what we'll do today is we'll talk a little bit about, let's see, that's not gonna go. Let me do it this way. There we go. We'll give a brief wreath history, not gonna go in depth too much, but just talk a little bit about it. We'll talk about evergreen cuttings, and then a little bit about different types of wreaths you can make. So there's more than one way to make a wreath. We'll just do one today, and will be our last point there, how to actually make your wreath. So we'll go through each of those, starting with the history of evergreen wreaths. So in the Persian Empire, they did wear a evergreen wreath, or a wreath made out of plants, as a headband. And then in ancient Greeks, as you may be familiar with, the Olympians, when they would win, they would be given a wreath to wear as well. In Roman times, the leaders would sometimes wear wreaths, and they were also hung on the doors as a sign of victory. As far as winter wreaths then, they were initially used for winter solstice celebrations. The Romans and the Britons used holly for decorating and to make wreaths. It was believed to have magical powers, and so it was included in their decorations for good luck and to ward off evil spirits. Of course, our modern wreaths date back more so to the 17th century, and to the Advent wreaths, and we have our circular wreath that can celebrate continuous life, being in a circle. So that's a quick brief history on that. So what should you be looking for in your evergreen cuttings that you'll use for a wreath? Needle retention is probably the most important trait that we're worried about with the evergreens. And so needle retention, in some aspects, it's a hereditary trait. So in many trees, grand fir, Douglas fir, white concolor fir, that trait is inherited. So you could breed for plants that will have greater or longer needle retention. It's also affected by when you harvest your trees, and so harvesting in the winter actually can help with better needle retention. The storage temperature will affect that as well. Of course, if you were to keep your tree or wreath outside, the needles will stay on longer than if it's inside your home. And also, if the tree already has some sort of plant disease that it's affected with, when you cut branches from those, the needles may stay on less long. They may drop more easily. This was one study that was looking more so at Christmas trees, and some of these species aren't as common around here. This was 5 weeks after these pre-cut trees were cut, and then they just bounce them on the ground and count the percentage of needles that end up dropping off of the tree. And you can see for something like blue spruce and Douglas fir that they actually dropped quite a few needles after being bounced, as compared to a Fraser fir or the Scotch pine.
That blue spruce is the one that's really spiky and hurts, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yes.
They're pretty to look at.
They are pretty to look at. I have actually used them in a wreath before, but you definitely want to make sure you have good gloves for that.
Now, do we have Fraser fir up here?
We don't naturally have Fraser fir growers, no.
Do they?
I got my definite tree.
So we'll go through some of the native evergreens that we have around here, starting with the Douglas fir. Not a true fir, but similar needles, And they have some interesting cones to them, if you're familiar with those. They've got the standard bracts here, but then they have these little odd-shaped bracts that stick out along the cones. The other evergreens don't have that. And if you've ever heard, I know I learned one story to help identify the Douglas fir. That bract that sticks out almost looks like a little mouse tail. And so the story was there had been a forest fire and the mice were running to hide from the forest fire, and so they hid inside these cones, so you just see their little tails sticking out.
Cute.
I like that one.
Yeah, so that's one identifying feature for these types of trees. And their needles, we'll talk about how fir needles are sort of flat in one plane. Although the needles themselves are flat needles, they come all around the branch or the twig of the trees, so unlike the true firs. Douglas firs, even though they don't have the best needle retention, they are used as Christmas trees and in wreaths. And like almost all the evergreens, they do have a nice scent to them. Grand fir is a common tree that you'll see around. They have the flat needles, they're rounded on the end. We're talking about the blue spruce. They are pokey and not so nice, but another sort of saying to help you remember about firs, firs are friendly. They have friendly needles, they're not pokey. So they've got the rounded needles. Primarily they'll come out all in a flat plane off of the branches. And then they often, for the grand fir, they have these two white lines down the bottom, the undersides of the needles there. And those are actually some stomata for the needles, which is how they exchange gas.
And the cones disintegrate?
They do.
Really?
Yeah, so you, here's a picture, so you won't usually see their cones. They'll be up high in the tree, they'll start off green, they may turn purplish, but they'll disintegrate before they fall down. They aren't like some of our other pine or
That's
evergreen.
pretty
Evergreen.
cute.
I didn't know that.
And this is a common Christmas tree and a tree used for wreaths as well. Subalpine fir is another fir that you'll see in our area, more so at higher elevations, although it is also used as a landscape tree and for a Christmas tree. They naturally have a nice Christmas tree shape to them, so they don't require a lot of pruning like some of the other Christmas trees. And they've sort of got almost a bluish color. This is their new springtime growth here, which is a lighter green color.
And they're soft too? Nice
Yes.
and soft?
Yes, also soft.
That's a pretty one.
And they are being used for Christmas trees a little bit more and more. They're still not one of the dominant trees that are grown by the tree farms in our area, at least. When the University of Idaho had their research facility in Sandpoint, they were looking at different seed sources that might provide the best trees. And since then, since they've closed down that research station, they have saved some of the trees that did the best. They did actually have some issues with a fungus that came along and just about killed some of the trees, depending on their seed sources. So over the years, they saved the ones that did the best, and now that that property's been sold, they did transplant some of those trees to the Christmas tree farms, so that hopefully they can collect some of the seed and grow that from there. At that facility, they also had a grand fir stand where they had done a similar project decades ago with grand fir and selected the trees that looked the best, and then the Christmas tree growers in the area would go there every few years and collect the cones and the seeds from the grand fir to use for their seed stock to grow Christmas trees. Western hemlock is another tree you'll see growing in our forests here. It's not as commonly used for Christmas trees, but it is very nice for wreath making. And they've got cute little cones on them. Their needles are also flat, also not pokey, but they are actually sort of different sizes. When you're looking at the branches, you'll see some that are sort of flat and a plane, but then others, sometimes smaller needles that will stick up more off of their branches.
And those grow tall.
They grow very tall, and when you're, it's State Tree of Washington, when one identifying feature if you're out in a forest and you can see the tops of the trees, the top of the tree does not point straight up.
Bends over.
Yeah, it bends over.
We call them lazy trees.
There you
Lazy.
go.
Oh, that's funny.
Ponderosa pine is another one of our native evergreen trees. You may have heard it referred to as yellow pine. And their needles, so when you're trying to identify a pine, one of the identifying features is the number of needles in the bundle. Let's see if I can pull up. So when you're looking at your different pines, the needles will come off sort of in a grouping, a bundle off of the stem. And with the ponderosa pine, they'll be in bundles of 2 or 3, and then you have fairly long needles, 4 to even 7 inches long. This is not actually. This is a white pine. Lodgepole pines also grow in our area. Their needles are a little bit more yellow in color oftentimes. They're shorter, 1 to 3 inches. And they have 2 needles in their bundle. And the species name, the scientific name is Pinus contorta, and that refers to the needles that are usually twisted. Each individual needle is sort of twisted. And their needles stay on the tree for about 4 to 6 years. And that's another identifying feature with your pines is how long those needles stay on the branches. And you can sort of look back down a branch and count. You'll see sort of the scar, the bud scar, where the previous year's growth was, and you can sort of count backwards and see how long those interior needles will naturally drop off of the tree. So in the fall, you'll, pretty obvious on the white pines, you'll see those turn yellow and drop. And that's just the natural cycle for those trees. They drop their needles at a certain time period. The western white pine has bundles of 5 needles in them. This one that I pulled off actually just has 4, but usually there's 5. This one has 5 in the bundle here of this white pine. They'll stay on the branches for 3 to 4 years. And the needles can be 3 to 4 inches long. These are probably just about 3 or so.
And how long are the pine cones on those? They're pretty long, aren't they?
Yes, I don't have a measurement, but they
Yeah.
can be quite long.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's the one you use for different crafts.
Yeah.
You take the individual needles and do all kinds, or the,
Oh, the pine
whatever
cones?
they call the
Oh,
sections.
like the bract there,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. They also tend to be fairly sappy and
Yeah.
sticky.
If you put them in the oven, it makes them
Yeah.
get black.
Forbidden
I
or
think
burned
your
out.
nut is more and more
Yeah.
tempting. Yeah. I do like those pine cones.
And then we've got the western red cedar, which is great for decorating this time of year.
It smells good.
Of course, it doesn't have the same type of needles. It has scales along its branches, the drooping foliage, that fibrous bark. You'll notice on the trunks of it, often found in more wet areas. And you may see the little cones that these get on their branches there. Now, some less common species, but that you may see, they are native to our area, include the Engelmann spruce. It is a spruce, so it's also pokey like a blue spruce. Sort of has a bluish color to it as well. the stiff, sharp needles to it. If you were to cut the needles and looked at the cross section of that needle, it would be square shaped as opposed to some of the flat shapes or rounder shapes with the pines and firs.
And that one looks pokey, is it?
Yes, yeah.
Jen, I need to go.
Home?
Yeah.
Okay. I will be right back. Sorry, folks.
When you're pruning your evergreens, late winter to early spring is a good time to prune most of the conifers. In general, you don't want to top your conifer, you don't want to cut off that leader, because you'll lose that nice cone shape to it. If you do end up losing it for other reasons from a storm, or if you have a blue spruce, you may notice that sometimes those tops die out because we have an insect that will kill off the top portion of the blue spruce. You can't, if it's young enough and you can get there, you can retrain a new leader. But
Really?
in general,
And
you
they
don't want
just
to
go
top.
after the top.
This particular, yeah, it's called the white pine weevil. It doesn't affect the western white pine, only the eastern white pine.
Wow.
Around here, it affects our blue spruce primarily.
Along the tops, there
Yeah.
you see the tops will like droop over.
Usually little pruning is needed for your conifers, but oftentimes if you've got a couple trees in your yard, some light pruning this time of year just for some wreath making isn't going to hurt them.
Okay.
All right, what kind of wreath should you make? There are all different
Diane
types
flip-flops
of
on this.
wreaths. Whether you've got some old leaky hose or
Oh,
just some
goodness.
flip-flops, you can turn
That's funny.
just about
That's
anything.
a great idea for a hose. I've
Yes.
got plenty of it. With garden gloves on it. That's nice.
That's cute, isn't it?
That is cute, actually.
But we'll focus on making some winter wreaths, such as these ones here, which, you know, if you go to some of these types of companies,
Yeah.
they are extremely expensive. They're still not, especially if you want a large one, they can still get expensive at some of the local stores as well. When you're putting together your wreath, there's really no wrong way. If this is the type of wreath that you're looking for, then that's great. But oftentimes it's nice to have a more full type wreath. So we'll try to focus on making a more full wreath today in the class. And this one was one that I had outside my home one year, stayed green quite a while. You can see it, well, perhaps you can see that it's sort of a mixed green, primarily of the grand fir and then some of the cedar in there. One year I did do a wreath that was just above our fireplace there. It's a little hard to see, but of course I put the lights on it. Now this one was inside for about a month or so, and it looked okay if you didn't look too closely at it. But by the time I took it out, the needles just dropped all the way out the door.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah. You can do other foliage in your wreaths as well. We don't have too many of the evergreen magnolias here. It's a bit
Yeah, really.
cold for
Look
them.
how bushy that tree is.
Yeah. Where I first learned to make wreaths at a public garden in Maryland, where they sold the wreaths as a fundraiser for the garden. And there we did have some of these magnolias and
Oh,
leaf
wow.
wreaths like this that were just beautiful.
Yeah. How big are the leaves?
They're about, you know,
Wow.
about that
They're
big
big.
or so, yeah. Alright. So how do you make a wreath? There's a couple different ways. One of them is to use a clamp style wreath frame, and then you'll have a table here with some sort of mechanism in it like this. And as you step down on the pedal, then those will clamp over on these. This is sort of bent out of shape, but it will clamp over on on these. So you would take bundles of your greenery, place it in there, and then clamp that down with the table, and then continue on. And if you're producing a lot of wreaths, it can make it go quicker. So some of your store-bought wreaths may be done in this style here.
I have over to get through. Not.
Another one is this crimp style wire wreath frame. And the frames themselves are just a single heavy wire, but you'll see that they're crimped around. And then you would use it with a table like this, which has this spool of wire that then just continually wraps around the frame and the greenery that you place in there. This will be sort of similar to what we do with a continual wire wrapping around, but we're just manually doing it.
There's plenty of them.
You could also use something like a grapevine wreath and just poke your greenery into it.
That's pretty.
Yeah. When you see the straw wreath forms at the craft stores, those probably aren't the best for an evergreen wreath. Not necessarily that strong, and if the greenery is still wet, it may cause some issues, but for some dry arrangements, that's pretty nice. So what we're going to use today is called this box wreath frame. And it's a wire wreath frame that's got 4 strands going across and then cross braces. And you'll notice that it's kind of raised up on the top. So that portion here, where it's raised up, this will be the front of your wreath, and it just helps add a little bit more volume to your wreath there. And so what you want to do is you want to make some bundles of greenery. And actually, let me start with this. So first off, you're going to take a paddle of wire, and you want to tie it off to one of the cross braces on your frame there, because you just want to make sure that it's not going to slide around. You want to make sure that it's secure in one spot to begin with. So you just need to wrap that around tight several times so that it's not going to move around. And then you're going to select your greenery. And we have some different greenery in the bags here. And we've got some pruners for you to use, hence the waiver. We don't want anybody to cut their finger off. So you'll take a branch or something like this. Some of them in the bags have been cut down a little bit smaller for you. For the frames that we have today, we've got 14-inch frames. And so what you'll want to do is cut about a 6-inch piece or so for each of your pieces, maybe a little bit longer. And you'll want to start off by cutting several of them so that you just have a pile of greens that you can work from. If you think that's some of it's too short, you can make something like that. If you've got a cut end on it, then you probably just want to make sure that that's in the back of your bundle, like that. And each bundle that you make, depending on what species of plants you're using, you'll probably want to have about 5 or 6 pieces in there. So I think I've got about 5, we'll do one more. And one more piece, so I've got a bundle here. And so you'll want to cut a bunch so that you you don't have to stop making your wreath and cut a bunch more bundles. Some people I know do prefer to wrap each bundle with a little bit of wire prior to actually attaching it to the frame. So you can decide if you think that's going to work best for you. I usually just will create the bundle in my hand, and then on my frame here, I've got that attached well there. I'm gonna set my bundle down on top of it and just wrap around. And that first bundle you might wrap around twice. You can wrap around 2 or 3 times, as much as you want. I usually find as I'm going along with the others, unless I need to walk away from the wreath, I'll just wrap once around. But you do want to make sure that it's tight on there so that it's not going to fall off.
Now Jen, that's at an angle or is it sideways?
So I have it a little bit of an angle pointing out, but I'm gonna sort of alternate how I angle it to make sure that I cover the whole frame.
Okay.
On the first one, I usually make sure to put the wire just about an inch or so from the bottom, because for that first one, it's gonna be where you're tucking in your last one to hide the base of it. And so if it's a little bit longer sticking out, then that can be helpful to tuck that in, so you can get that last bundle tucked in there. So you'll just go along and you'll angle them out at different directions as needed, to make sure that you're not seeing any of your frame. Go ahead and, this one I'm gonna put a little bit, so I've got that one there. I'm thinking, oops, for this one, I'll angle it a little bit farther in. And then, it's a little hard to do standing up, but I'm gonna wrap that around there a couple times. Alright, and then this next bundle might stick up top here a little bit. And you just want to keep going all the way around your frame, and you'll just keep adding more and more and more until you get to the end. And we'll just jump ahead here with our example. Get a little bundle. Alright. So then this last bundle, like I mentioned, we'll tuck it under here. Make sure that you can't see those ends. And then if you need some help, I can try to help hold it, but you'll just sort of lift up that first bundle and then wrap your wire around. And then as you sort of lay that other bundle flat, you can't really tell
Oh, yeah.
where that ended up. So, and depending on how much you like, I mean, I might go in with my pruners and prune out that sort of shaggy guy, but that's up to you. Then when you finish, you just want to make sure that you're tying off securely again to one of the braces, so that it's not gonna move around and loosen up, and then have all your greenery fall out. Alright, this was just this was one of these little 6-inch frames, like that. We don't have too many decorations. All I brought with me today was some ribbon for a bow. But if you did want to add decorations, pine cones, of course, can be nice to add if you've got some in your yard. And what I generally do is just take a little bit of wire and I'll wrap it, just sort of tucking it. This is a plastic pine cone actually, but with a real one too, I just wrap it around under the little bracts that stick out. And then you can make sure your wire's long enough that you can then wire it around the whole wreath. And put it on like that.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, you can when we were doing them at the garden as the fundraiser, we would either have some decorations on a stick, which you can purchase at some of your craft stores, or you can just purchase wooden picks that have a little bit of wire on them and wire them on and then push it into the frame as well. So that's another option. Alright. And are there any questions